get it going, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists to join me on stage. Our first has more than 25 years experience in global logistics and procurement. He's currently responsible for the global freight and packaging spend across the global production network of Joyson Safety Systems. This is an important tier 1 manufacturer that is a combination of what was Key Safety Systems and Takata a few years ago. And I'm very proud to welcome Paul Biegen. Paul's going to help us keep the flow. Thank you, Paul. Yep. Yeah, have a seat here at the end. And our next, keeping with the tier 1 theme, our next panelist has been with his current company for 4 years, but has more than 16 years experience in supply chain and logistics, currently responsible for supporting the development and deployment of logistics strategies, policies, and procedures across American Axle's Manufacturing's logistics. Very pleased to welcome Ryan Etherton, Senior Manager, Global Transportation and Logistics. Thank you, Ryan. Next up, our next speaker has 22 years experience in the industry ranging from manufacturing to logistics. She joined the current company, Kuehne + Nagel, in 2011 and has held positions across CE and key accounts. And very pleased now that she can join us here. Julia Pongracz, Vice President Sales, Head of Automotive Vertical for North America, Kuehne + Nagel. Thank you, Julia. Welcome. Please have a seat. And last but not least, a highly accomplished senior management professional here, responsible for commercial across quite an important player in terms of really keeping the flow when it's really necessary. Scott Morson, Commercial Director at Royale International. Thank you, Scott. Please have a seat. Okay, so similar format to what we had before, panel discussion. We'll open it up for audience at various times, but really keen to keep a good flow here going. I just want to kick off turning to our tier 1s to get us going. We've talked about it in a few other panels as well, how this ongoing disruption has changed the way many companies had to manage their supply chains day to day. And I'm just interested to hear from both of you impacts on things like monitoring, tracking, and even decision making. And Paul, I'm gonna throw it over to you to start.
Okay. So as far as maybe changes that we've made, in order to overcome these disruptions that we've seen, I think in the past we've switched from more strategic thinking and to more tactical. So what we did at Joyson Safety Systems was try to set up more closer meetings with our key freight forwarders, whether it was on a weekly basis or multiple times per week, in order to understand where our shipments were, what vessels they had planned for those particular containers, that we had container space and containers ready for us. So I think it was more of that weekly or constant communication with our key freight forwarders in order to keep our supply chain going. That was a key for us.
Yeah, so as we I think we referred to as the war room in some of our other sessions, a bit more of the war room setting. Ryan, similar for you, or other things you would add to that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same. I'd add, from the tactical standpoint, it was, roll up your sleeves, hands-on approach, right? A lot of understanding the issues that our global plants were having, leveraging the abilities of our providers to come up with quick solutions that could deliver parts to our facilities to meet the customer schedules, but also from a more strategical standpoint, having to kind of become a freight forwarder in the background and working with people like Julia and some of our providers to really holistically understand the options in full, what we could do, understanding everything from cost, transit time, and then working with our plants to make sure that any of these options that are required would meet the need of our plants. And that one of the things that we were doing is, as Paul mentioned, meeting with our forwarders, but we were, from a strategical perspective, making sure that we were having meetings that focused on making sure that our forecasts were provided to our forwarders, several weeks out, 8 weeks out or so. And then understanding, based on those volumes, are we going to secure the bookings that we need? And if we're not getting those bookings, having, let's say, a 1B plan and working with another forwarder to see if they can provide a solution, or looking at different options. Can we move majority of the material FCL, and then are we having to do LCL, or even looking as far as air freight, just to make sure that we can sustain the flow of the material and the requirements coming into our facilities?
So if I could turn that to the logistics provider view, Julia, if you have customers like Ryan becoming freight forwarders in the background, how does that impact how you've worked? What's the most significant difference in the way you're operating with your customers and carrier partners in this scenario?
Yeah, I think in the past, we always would look at cost, and we would just talk with mostly procurement people on the customer side. Now we understand it's really important to not just know the customer and the procurement side, but to know the service, the routing, the requirements, and then marry that up with the plant requirements and have the relationships at all levels in the organization. That's been really key to successful onboarding of new business, and then also firming that up for current customers and making sure we're talking at all the levels in the organization and not just at a procurement level.
That's an interesting point there. Scott, what about from a expediting premium freight point of view? How has that been changed for you?
Well, we've had to become a bit more consultative rather than just handling requests. We've actually been having to give a lot more advice. It's become really important to talk to the clients on a sort of daily basis, the war room type mentality. And then internally, the same sort of thing. We were having to have daily meetings or daily calls to really try and work out exactly where capacity was available. And we had to sort of be quite innovative with having to come up with new solutions that we hadn't used before, and that was a big change for us. But a lot of it was down to sort of providing advice in advance of what to do and how to handle problems, rather than clients coming to us and saying, "This has already happened.
Yeah.
We know this is going to happen. So what should we do with it?" And that, to be honest, is still going on to some degree now with certain markets, especially China with the current situation.
So it's a sort of situation of almost planning to use the
Yes.
emerging services as opposed to just reacting to them. And Ryan, does that kind of speak to when you talked about extending out that 6 to 8 week view and then identifying earlier where you might need to partner with a company like Scott's or others?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, typically depending on the situation at hand and understanding the type of activity or execution of a premium mode that we have to do, we'll go to understand who we should work with, leverage their capabilities and expertise in that particular area, and then follow through with that based on the solutions they can provide. But also it was exhausting every option, so it wasn't just accepting the first thing that was discussed by our partner, our forwarder. It was really saying, hey, let's slow down. Let's really break the situation down. Let's look at all the different port options. Let's look at diversions from rail to truck, or we did a lot of things where we couldn't get direct routings or sailing, so we would go to ports that we haven't used before and let's say terminate there and direct truck into Mexico because there wasn't direct routings and we needed faster transit time. So we learned a lot in the process and done a lot of things that we haven't done in the past. And my advice is, don't accept the first option and really dig deeper and work with people like Julia. And for the longest time, I went deep into the organizations of our forwarders and really started working with the directors of ocean procurement and different people to really give them the information that we needed to provide to them, like Julie mentioned, giving them exactly what we're dealing with, giving them the information and allowing them to take more time to try to come up with a more catered or custom solution.
So if I understand correctly, Julia and the freight forwarding side needed to talk to more than the procurement within organizations like Scott, like Paul's and Ryan's. But Brian and Paul, perhaps you had to talk to more of the procurement side of
More than sales.
Or the sales
right?
side, yeah. So that already you see how those dynamics sort of they're getting deeper into it. Paul, if we kind of take us behind the scenes a little bit in terms of how it's sort of being done. I mean, is it through control tower kind of scenarios with partners or in-house spreadsheet chasing, all of the above?
Yeah, all of the above. We did put together a new control tower in Monterrey, Mexico, for a lot of our traffic coming into the U.S. and Mexico. So we built that up in February, March of this year. So it was kind of as these disruptions were, like we were in the middle of that, but got those people up to speed. We got a TMS system. We got a premium move application, cargo base that we put in place because we had to get good at premium moves. So we needed a solution that was going to go out to all the different forwarders, get us as many bids for the services that we were looking for, and be able to quickly get approvals at all levels within our company, and then turn that into into an actual move. So unfortunately, we had to get good at that. But to Ryan's point, we also did work very closely with our freight forwarders. We got to know not only the sales folks like Julie, but we were always working with the operations people, but we had to go deeper into the procurement groups of the forwarders as well to be sure that we had allocations and containers, ready for us, for the coming weeks.
So quite a few actions there, though, in terms of some of the systems and processes that you're building up and expanding, partly as a result of this.
Yeah.
Ryan, again, is that in terms of some of those systems, is that a similar approach, different?
Yeah, we do some of the similar things in terms of using various bid boards and things like that. But I would take a little different approach in terms of what we tried to do is, in some respect, we had more regional base control towers where some of our regions were the face of American Axle to the forwarder, so they were managing some of it regionally, and we realized that we needed to unite those synergies. So the global contacts as the lead procurement person for American Axle on the ocean side, I was pulling together our global resources, and then we had situations where we had our operation in India would be paying for freight that was exporting India. We had freight that was inbound into Mexico coming from India, and they were using different providers. And it wasn't always the case where we could, leveraging all of our volume was the solution, but in this case, we found good opportunities to bring those groups together, leverage our volume, look at any synergies that we could connect, and then by having singular calls where I could have the leads of those ocean departments from each of those regions and myself, and connecting that with the plant teams, we were able to find some pretty good solutions and improve upon some of our routings and leverage some of those volumes where we were having hard times finding bookings and combining some of our shipments where we kept the continuity of freight moving versus contributing to additional premium freight.
So it's interesting to, again, hear these tactics to keep the flow as we've been talking about. Maybe turning to you first, Scott. Again, other impacts from a business like yours, because it sounds like with this need for extreme creativity and flexibility, it must impact on the partners and carriers you work with and other things like that. So you can tell us a little bit about maybe how some of that may have changed.
Yeah, it forced us to look at a lot of new and different options that we hadn't explored before, and things that we're still using now and finding very useful, but it was really a case of having to look at as many different possibilities to come up with solutions. But the tough markets like China, where we had very few flights at one point, we were having to come up with solutions where we were saying to clients, to get your shipment away, it's got to go on 3 different airlines over 2 days, because the next flight after that's 7 days away. So you've got to sort of look at every possible option that's there to be able to sort of come up with a solution that's going to work for the client. And at that stage, we did start seeing clients coming to us well in advance and saying, we think we're going to have material on these 2 or 3 days. Can you find us solutions for that? And we'd come back and say, this is what we can do. We've ended up working with a lot more partners over the last sort of 2 years than we've ever had to do, because it's been a case of having to be flexible from our side. Our operations guys have had to be very, very creative with what they're doing. We brought in a hybrid product particularly for markets that were shut down, where we'd mix between a NFO to a destination, and then a hand carry to final destination, which we hadn't really done much of before, but that became a very solid solution for a lot of clients, and is still a solution for some of the more challenging markets, Taiwan, China, particularly getting into the US and Mexico. So it tended to be those type of problems that we had to come up with solutions for. So it was really a case of every day having an internal call to say, right, what space can we get out of Germany, out of Mexico, out of the US? What have we actually got available tomorrow and the day after? And then offering that to clients as a solution from there. So it has been very challenging, but it has helped us develop operationally. We've seen the team become a much stronger, much more creative during the last sort of 2 years. And we are seeing the benefits of that now, but at the time, it's quite challenging. At the time, it is the war room mentality, but now it's really helping us in a more stable environment.
Yeah. Julia, how about, I mean, I can imagine some similar aspects from a Kuehne+Nagel, and when we hear about all these flexible solutions, when we hear about these combinations of modes that we've never had before, I mean, behind the scenes, must take extraordinary coordination and work to help realize.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that we have is knowing what you want to present, because we've talked about like sea air options post-COVID, which looks good, but then when you put it on paper with the transit time, maybe I just need air freight, right? But for us, I think it's really listening to the customer, and at the plant level, we've really learned now that we're traveling again, it's really important that our local operations, even if there are control towers at a higher level to look at the data and what's happening, we really need to sit and understand what the plant's going through, because their voices, they're the ones that are waiting on those parts, and then translating that back with the buyer or the person that's trying to put the solution together to say, we can give you these options, but we know this is what's going on. So the increased collaboration of actually working in our internal operations to put solutions together is new. Usually the salesperson just pitched something in a bubble, and then we sold it, and then the plant's like, that's not what I want. So to Ryan's point about some of these types of sharing things, we really need to understand like what they need as much as they need to understand what we can offer.
And that's what we've been pushing for as well, Julia. I mean, even within our company, we've been trying to get that communication open between us, or say the control tower, and the plants, to try to understand what their needs are, what their orders will be in the next 4, 5, 6 weeks, so that we can then communicate that off to the forwarder. So you're trying to do that with the plants. I know the forwarders are trying to do that with us through us, to the plants. But that's important to understand what their demands are going to be in the next 4 to 6 weeks to keep things going.
Whereas, I mean, it goes without saying, previously that would have been a more stable, reliable expectation compared to, and so it's changed even the way you have to communicate with your plants to get that information in real time.
In the past, yeah, our planners would place the orders with the suppliers, and again, they would wait 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and it would arrive. It would just be there, and there was no issue with capacity or getting those pallets on a container. It would just happen. But of course, now there's a lot more pre-planning that needs to be done, and in order to be sure that we get that capacity and get that vessel sailing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, another thing is you can make changes, even though we feel like the shipment won't hit the transit time or something's going wrong. The biggest thing we talk about internally when I do a lot of the conversations with the operations when I travel is, if you let the planners know, they could adjust a schedule, a shift.
Yep.
They might not run production that day. There are things you can do to mitigate and wait 2-3 days versus 2-3 weeks delay to avoid premium spend, and those are things that we want to increase that to help you also mitigate cost.
Yep.
So a lot of what we've talked about so far, I think, it's creativity and solutions that have come, and I can see room where a lot of them will continue even in the magical time when everything settles down, by the time, which I don't think will come anytime soon, by the way. But we can take those things forward. But clearly, when we talk about a war room approach, a tactical approach, it sort of implies not such a strategic approach, or let's say perhaps less time for a strategic approach. Paul, are you seeing some of the downsides of that? I mean, besides the obvious disruption in costs, is that an area that, actually really we need to start shifting towards? How can we move back towards the strategic view?
Oh, for sure, we have to go from, our maybe 50%, 50-50 right now, from 50% tactical, or it's probably about 60-40, 60% tactical, 40% strategic, to a little bit more strategic, start thinking ahead, and we will do that. I mean, this is, yeah. I think the operations teams, they're going to start working on those operational calls with the forwarders, now on their own, in the coming weeks. We've put a couple of initiatives together that will continue on through this better container utilization, which is kind of a strategic initiative that kind of came out of a need to get more pallets, more stuff in our ocean containers. Before we were filling them up, maybe 50, 60%. I mean, I hate to say it here, yeah. But we started that initiative. It was a tactical thing in order to be sure that we were utilizing, as few containers as we could from a cost perspective, but because there just weren't that many containers to be used. So we wanted to be sure that we had enough more stuff in those containers. So that was kind of a tactical thing that really turned into a strategic type initiative that we're going to continue on tracking and following up, in the future. So that's kind of a good segue from, you know, some of the benefits that we saw looking at that in detail on a tactical level to, you know, a strategic initiative.
Have you identified similar things, Ryan, or yeah?
Yeah, I would agree. I would think when you know we're seeing some softening, I think there's some signals that, you know, as we move into the second half of next year, I think we're going to see some more normalization. But I think I can speak for myself that as involved as we've been in dealing with a lot of the operational challenges, I think we're going to be well prepared for when the market changes. From a standpoint of being flexible and agile, then thinking about how we can provide different solutions internally to our teams and our plants. When you think about, you know, trade-offs of inventory and cost, different types of mode opportunities. I think when we do RFQ events or different things like that, we're gonna tackle them a little bit differently, thinking, you know, as Paul mentioned, more strategically and maybe not just, you know, giving the first solution, but looking at the second and third option and thinking about what's gonna fit best based on when you take, you know, risk into account, where the material's coming from, what different port pairings can we achieve or can we use. So yeah, I think I don't know if it's going to make our job any easier, but I think we're just going to be more well prepared to make decisions that are actually going to benefit our business, you know, from a cost and reliability standpoint.
One of the things we heard this morning when we spoke with General Motors, and I know other OEMs have talked about doing it, was, I mean, they've been able to buy some excess capacity insurance, if you like, as it's been referred to in terms of containers and ocean and air. That's not really something it's feasible really for tier 1 so far as I understand it. So in many cases, obviously, when you're chasing a handful of containers in some cases from some regions, it's quite a different approach. So I'm just interested to hear, though, if you see other ways that you can proactively secure some of this capacity, or is it through data? Is it through working with partners in that way? Again, just to share some ideas, if that's the way you've started to think. I'll turn back to you on that, Ryan.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we were looking at any insurance policies or didn't necessarily know that anything like that existed. But I think in the very beginning it was really just trying to muscle through it. But it was using the data that we had, understanding customer demand, translating that into our requirements, and then being as transparent as we could with our partners and giving them the information, and then, you know, trying to, you know, give some flexibility where we could. So having open discussions where forwarders would tell us, you know, hey, this is what we can and this is what we can't do, and understanding what can be achieved, executing that, and then looking for fallback options that could, you know, not put us at any type of risk. So I don't know if there was a one-way solution, but we looked at doing, you know, everything we could, just because in some cases there was days where you know, we were finding out that we lost our bookings, and it's putting you in a high priority mode and really emergency critical thinking. But I think, you know, just trying to plan out as far as we could. We knew that by trying to give our forecast and securing bookings 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks out, where it was possible, was going to give us the best chance to at least execute.
Yeah, so definitely working more proactively in advance in that way. Paul, you referred earlier to using a new system for premium, for have you with that, and so I gave you more options. Is that kind of what the key outcome of that was? So, as you mentioned, give you more options in booking.
That was one of the key outcomes, and through what we were able to hook up, you know, the different service providers that we wanted to hook up to that. So in the past, we were maybe going out manually to 3 or 4, you know, different service providers in order to get, you know, rates on whether it was a hand carry or a charter. Now we can hook up, you know, 5 or 10 or 15. The system will send out those requests, you know, to the proper service providers. We'll get the rates back within, you know, the hour or 2 hours, and so we'll first of all have more of a market spread. We'll get the best rates with, you know, tied up with the best service. So that was good. We found we got a 10% reduction, you know, when we piloted that in Europe, and then we also found that in the past we really didn't have a good compliant process. So the planners at the plant, those are the ones that are going out looking for the premium moves. They may go out to their uncle's trucking company in order to, arrange these things, and that happens over and over again. The uncle might not be so competitive, once you start plugging in, many other carriers into the system. So it provided us with a better look at the market, gave us more accountability, with our planners at the plant. And then we didn't have planners making decisions on a $20 or $30 or $40,000 premium move that had to get approval from the plant manager or the regional vice president at certain points. So all those things, the system that we put in place helped us put a more robust process in place that also saved us money.
Scott, does a system like that impact the way you operate as well, or is that?
There's a lot more of these type of systems around that we're having to interact with. So some of them make it easier, some of them do make it more challenging for us, but the core processes that we utilise are the same whichever way that we handle it. So if it's a platform-related situation similar to what Paul's got, then we handle the jobs in exactly the same way as we do with a normalised email or contact from that perspective. So it does change the way that we have to work. Some of the platforms are easier to work with than others, and people use them in different ways. So it does come across from our side where we have to sort of think about each particular platform and each client and how they're using it and work out what's the best way for us to work with them. But it's not a major challenge. It's something that we've come to work with over the last few years. Even prior to COVID, it was a situation that we were trying to sort of handle. But it's not a huge issue from our side of things, whether it's portal related or whether it's a standalone client. We basically go through the same processes to get onto the system. Where it can be challenging, if there is an area, is it does sometimes take away the sort of personal element that we have with a lot of our clients, where you are just putting information on a portal and you're never quite sure if it's being treated as apples for apples as a solution, and that can be challenging. But that's where working with the clients to actually understand, is it pure cost, is it really actually time that's the issue, and trying to get to the bottom of those things. That's the sort of challenge from our side of things, and that's where our sales teams have to be working with the clients to get that information to pass to the operations guys to give them the right information to win as much business as possible.
And Julie, if we were to look to Kuehne+Nagel's sort of more strategic systems or approaches that you're taking, I know there have been significant investments in sort of analytics and visibility tools and things. Can you talk a bit about, how they may have come into play in these sorts of scenarios, or perhaps not, and I guess what the next step and direction is for that you would see for that?
Sure. During COVID, we actually did a lot of investment and saying like what makes sense and what will make our lives easier. But of course, they all have limitations, because we all know the end-to-end visibility is what everyone desires real time. Our team, the Sea Explorer tool is something that we really have utilized, and it was nice to have, but now it's almost a daily conversation whether you use us or not for sea freight. Right. So that's been super helpful in taking the emotion out of the conversation, saying there's really 70 vessels waiting outside the LA port. And things like predictive analytics on the ETA of the vessel. So we've done a really good job integrating that into our API and EDI messages. So it's not real time, but it's more of a predictive analytics algorithm in the background for at least arrival to the port of call. But then the next step that we're still in process on is the availability of the cargo. So it's great to know when it's arriving, but Paul wants to know, Ryan wants to know, when am I going to get it? Yeah. And we're like, well, it's right there outside the port, but when it will be offloaded, and figuring out how to, use AI technology to predict that when the cargo will be available. And then the inland piece is a challenge, globally everywhere. So the door move is always then the final piece, which is why we need people. Yeah. So technology is great, but you can't take the human element out of, where is it at and what's going on. So I hope to continue further work on that, and the cargo availability would be really good if we can get there as well.
Yeah. As you said, certainly at this stage, the person and the relationship and the communication is probably not going to be automated at this point from that. Paul, I mean, in terms of things like data analytics, predictive analytics, does that very much mirror what Julia has described, or is there other areas that you're also looking to gain more information from?
Yeah, certainly we're looking at, or the TMS that we have right now does provide predictive analytics on the vessel arrivals, at the different ports. So that's there. The one problem I think that we're struggling with is on, say, the origin pickup. We have a buyer's console coming out of Europe, and there's a shortage of truckers. So even though you may have a pickup scheduled for a Thursday, it might not get picked up until the following Monday or Tuesday, and then it may miss the vessel departing Hamburg. So getting better predictive analytics on just even the front end and the milestones after that is super important.
Yeah.
Not just the long vessel trip, because that tends to be maybe a little bit more predictable than the stuff that's happening at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're coming close. We have about 5 minutes left. I did want to, if there is comments or questions from the audience, we can. Yes, great. We have a question right here towards the back. If we can just have a mic there. In the meantime, she's coming right behind you, and the only reason is because our online audience can then also hear you.
Greetings to the online audience. So for Ryan and Paul, with the volatility that you're seeing on inbound components, how are you managing that with the factory floors? How are they scheduling lines if we can't ensure that raw material is going to be there per the production schedule?
So, yeah, it's a little bit of a tough one. I think we've done everything we can do. So I would say first thing that we've done is educate. On a monthly basis for the past 18 months, I've personally been developing kind of my own market update, which I'm bringing in a lot of information that's coming from a lot of external sources. But I think it's important that we're giving as much information based on the market, things that are disrupting the market, and this is going throughout the entire organization up to the CEO, plant managers, operations managers, supply chain team, purchasing, et cetera. So first is setting the stage and making the expectations so everyone understands exactly where we're at. The second thing outside of that is also when we're having, we've always had quarterly business reviews, but now we've integrated more monthly business reviews with our forwarders, and that's to get as much information. So we're tracking the most recent transit times of our shipments. So we're continuously giving information to our plants and planning teams in order to update our planning parameters inside of our operating system. So transit times, then also they need to be, taking that information in consideration of their inventory strategies, customer requirements, tendencies from the customers, which we all know that's very difficult to predict. But really, we've said over time, it's a trade-off. I mean, we need to buffer inventory right now because there's too much variability. There's a lot of swings in transit time. And the premium cost of air freight, especially in an international trade lane, is always going to outweigh the cost of inventory holding. So I think those are some of the things that we've tried to do: educate, inform, be proactive, and in the event that when a premium decision has to be made, don't wait, because we all know that the ocean market hasn't been impacted. It's the air market as well, where you could move a flash shipment in 3 or 4 days. That's turned into sometimes 7 to 10 days. So there's no reason to wait. You have to make intensive decisions and move forward in order to protect your plan.
And from our perspective, also educate, inform the planners at the plant. It's also about, for us, kind of resetting the mindset. Transit times, for instance, the transit time from Shanghai to Manzanillo, Mexico, is no longer going to be 20 days, for example. It could be 25 days. So we may need to adjust our inventories, for our Chinese suppliers by a certain amount. So it's resetting standards of service, resetting inventory buffer standards, but also then getting the visibility, to those shipments as they come from the Chinese origin supplier through on the vessels. So visibility is a big thing as well.
Thank you. So a couple, just coming towards the end, but there's a key point that I wanted to ask around where there may be scope for more collaboration among tier ones. And of course I want to hear from the tier ones on that, but I actually want to turn to you first on that, Julia, because I think it's no surprise that a freight forwarder could be a good enabler of that. So, you know, is that something that you see already as mainly, if you like, part of your job to facilitate that? But are there other ways and opportunities you see for that to improve?
Absolutely, that's a core part of our job, especially in the sales side or the key account side. When we visit customers, it's important to the voice of the client or the customer to take that internally and see the trends. So if I'm talking to Paul and then I see the same conversation I'm having with Ryan, it'd be silly not to ask them, do you have the same challenges, and here's those solutions. I think what's a little bit missing is the need for more collaboration amongst the tier ones themselves to help us, where do you need things? Sometimes we're guessing at the tools or technology or resources. So yeah, I look forward to more of that, but that's absolutely at the core of the heart of what we do across all of our customer base.
Okay. What about, Ryan, from your side? I mean, are there areas, forums, data, et cetera, that you'd be interested to share and collaborate more with colleagues like Paul?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the issue, I mean, one of the challenges there is just having communication, you know, with a Paul, because typically we're not communicating with other tier ones. We're communicating internally, or the customer, or our providers. But you know, I would say somewhat of a kind of a success story that we had is through our forwarders. We were actually, you know, found an opportunity to share some of the capacity that we had with one of their other clients. So we looked at the situation. It was a win-win for everybody. We were gonna, it wasn't jeopardizing our freight. We were actually able to subsidize some of the crazy costs that we took, you know, coming from, you know, Korea. And that was a pretty cool thing that we did through collaboration, through open discussion, to optimize a container that was going to help, you know, two different customers of our forwarder. So I think that's kind of some of the things that we've done. But of course, always willing and open to collaborate where things make sense.
It's a great story, and it sounds like you had some pretty good success. You know, we as Joyson would be, you know, open to that, trying to understand, you know, your network or, you know, other tier ones, you know, networks, and where, you know, their product flows, you know, fit with ours, and how we can work with the different forwarders in order to, you know, be sure that all of our products get to our plants, you know, on time, and not one favored over another. You know, that would be a win-win, like you said.
Great. So that's a win-win we've identified, and we're going to hold you to it and follow up on it. Sure. To round out the session, though, before we get on to, as I mentioned, keeping another flow going, I want to just hear from each of the panelists on the top opportunity that you see to better manage the flow of your supply chain looking to 2023. So looking ahead a little bit to next year, top opportunity that you see. I'm going to start with you on that, Scott.
Well, we're looking into a lot of new markets for ourselves. We've been looking seriously at Brazil now because of what clients are saying to us, and that's something that I think we'll be pushing into Q1 next year. We've recently opened in Israel, and that's got some huge opportunities for us. Not so much automotive, but certainly with the semicons and all that side of things. There's still a huge amount of scope for us here in the US and Mexico, and those will be big focuses for us going into next year. We've invested heavily in new staff, building additional sales teams and that side of things. And we're seeing with some of our key clients at the moment a lot more along the lines of integration, and the partnership's really growing to allow us to actually plan things a little bit better or get better ideas of what they're doing over the coming sort of 12, 18 months. So I think for us there's going to be a lot of expansion going on. And in some of the more difficult markets, Brazil being one that we've been looking at for a while. So those are the sorts of things that I think we're going to be sort of concentrating on over the next 12, 18 months.
Yeah. Certainly a sign of where there is disruption in the supply chain, but this, you know, opportunity will carry benefits, and both for your company, but also for the supply chain where these options become available.
Yeah.
Julia, from Kuehne+Nagel's point of view.
For me, it's hard to answer because it's, you know, each product would have an opportunity per se with our customers, but I would like to just use the time to say, let's try something different. So automotive is changing, you know, everybody's focused on what we're doing. It's an exciting time to be in the industry. I love automotive, as all of you do here, but not so much does everybody love us. So as partners, it'd be nice to try something different, whether it's how we approach an RFQ, whether it's how we do the MBRs, what we measure, what data we pull, whatever it is, we need to not be afraid and be the leaders to change and do things to keep our supply chains running.
Julia, we love you back.
I would agree. I think that's a great suggestion. I think specifically to American Axle, it's been said, you know, numerous times today, but I think visibility is something that we're, you know, deeply looking into and plan on investing into. We think it'll help us for planning, but also, you know, some cost mitigation. So that's hopefully when I'm here next year, we'll be talking about some of the technology improvements we made and how it's improved our operation.
Fantastic. And Paul?
I think for us, top opportunity is going to be better planning. And I say maybe 4, 6, 8 weeks out, try to understand what is going to be shipped from our various suppliers overseas so that we can get the right pickups from our truckers overseas, get the right equipment, get the right sale dates, get those vessels moving, you know, to our plants on time. And by doing that, I mean, by having that pre-planning, working with the forwarders so that they understand, you know, when the vessels are sailing, if there's a blank sailing, but just using the data to build up what's going to be shipped in 4 to 5 weeks so that we can get the proper equipment, vessels, and timing to our plant on time.
Absolutely. Well, some great opportunities there. It shows that amongst great disruption comes opportunity as well. This has been a great way to conclude our content for today. Thank you to all of you, Paul, Ryan, Julia, and Scott, for your insights and for keeping the flow right up to the end here. So thank you very much.